Hey guys, it's great to be back with you again. Another episode of SAAB Talk Live, about half an hour of content for you, geared just for everybody in the SAAB community. I'm Lee Kelso.
I'm Mark Romisher, and welcome everyone back to the show. We're here almost every Thursday
Almost.
night from 8 p.m., and we're on YouTube and Facebook, and we're trying to bring enthusiasm to the SAAB community. Now, this week we do have a special guest, Mr. John Moss. I've been told by other SAAB aficionados that he's a legend in the SAAB community, and to my knowledge, he's worked for SAAB for across 2 different centuries. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're exactly right. One of the things that we talk about often is, what makes these cars special is not only the technology, but the community around it. And John told me that there was a real sense of community and kind of a special feeling back in the early days of SAAB USA. So eager to hear from him. So let's bring him to the program. John, good morning, good afternoon. How you doing?
Welcome, John.
I'm just fine. Thank you, sir.
Glad to have you with us. So, did I overstate that? Was it kind of a special feeling around the place back in those early days of SAAB USA?
Oh, most definitely. Again, a small group, but very dedicated. And we had people that I've a few cases, people that had left the company for 20 years or more would come back to a company picnic or function and say that was the high point of their lives and meant more to them than just about anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's pretty great. So this was a company that was, of course, we all know, right? Started in the aircraft business, but then in the 50s, the story I hear is the chairman of SAAB came over and was talking to a guy who was buying their aircraft parts for them here in the United States and said, "Hey, how about you get involved and we sell cars?" And then it kind of took off from there. And that was in the 50s, right?
Yes. First, basically 1956 was the beginning. And, very small scale, but then moved on from there.
So my understanding is that back in those days, to be a SAAB dealer, give me an indication of what that was like. Who were those people?
It's almost hard from today's perspective to bridge the gulf there, but that would put a couple of cars in the front yard and sell them. A lot of gas stations, service stations, even a couple of boat yards. You had to be able to deal with something a little bit quirky. Again, boat dealers knew what two-stroke engines were all about. They knew enough to put oil in the gasoline and deal with that sort of issue. So they were usually on a fairly small scale. Shortly thereafter, you began to get some good big dealers that stuck with us forever, the Gaston Andres up in Boston and so on. But the majority of the original dealers were, mom and pop shows, basically. Excellent people for the most part.
Hey, somebody's excited you're on live here, John. I think that might be somebody calling you. Hey, did you know you're on the internet?
Well, we'll ignore that. So I'm sorry about that.
It's okay, no problem. Hey, got a question up on the screen here. Did you and Bob Sinclair ever get any cahoots or weird projects in Connecticut back in the day?
Bob was a piece of work. I loved him dearly. Too quickly. There used to be the one lap around America race. Huh? And Bob Sinclair was up for any sort of race at all. So I had to prepare a car for this race. There were several people in it. We needed to be able to basically sleep in the car because they were driving 24 hours a day. So I set one up with half of a rear seat and a bed in the other half. Passenger side was a bed going clear back to the from the back of the front seat to the back of the trunk there. So your co-driver could be sleeping in the back. So there that and radar detectors and the usual folderol to, so Bob Sinclair could, get as many speeding tickets as he could. So that was a Saab related Bob Sinclair. One of my favorites, though, was he was a big motorcycle guy. Loved motorcycles. Some of your people will know about the Saabsa, which was a old duffer on the Isle of Man, put a 3-cylinder Saab engine in a BSA. So it was called the Saabsa. And remember one time he had a interview going on, rode the Saab motorcycle across the second level of the headquarters building in Orange, Connecticut, spitting out floor tiles behind him as he went. But he also had an old, and it was, I believe, a Nimbus inline 4-cylinder motorcycle he brought in, and he wanted a sidecar attached to it. And I'd never seen a sidecar in my life, so I spent a couple of days bolting up this sidecar, trying to get the alignment right, and Bob would come down, and I'd jump in the sidecar, and we'd go off down the road, and he'd come back, oh, not quite right, John. Finally got it, so we go down the road. He never did get one of his kids to drive in it, but he showed up the next week at the company picnic with the family dog with a set of Snoopy goggles on it, riding, and a hat, riding co-pilot in this sidecar rig. So
pretty wild
Bob
stuff.
was a hoot.
Okay, we've got a question here also asking about cutting the tips off fuses as a trick diagnostic. I don't think I get that. Can you explain that for me, John?
I suspect somebody, either you cut the tips off or you put tape on one of the legs of the fuse. Part of the school was you'd run the guys through theory, and then you take them out in the shop, and typically towards the end you'd have a bugged car. And so sometimes it'd be a matter of putting the wrong relay in the hole, or just the fuse was good because it's simple, and you had to get folks to back off and look for the basics, which it usually is, as opposed to going into a death spiral, replacing computers and looking for the most complicated thing they can find.
I think bad on me. I didn't explain to folks what your role was. Tell us what you did. What was your job back there in Saab USA?
Okay, well, I started out in the company car shop because I'd had a 2-stroke in college, and you couldn't drive a 2-stroke without knowing how to fix the blessed things. So I walked into the company car shop one day just needing something to do. Went from there. Worst year of my Saab career was I was the entire customer relations department around 1972. So I lived through the early 99 and last of the 2-stroke warranty days.
Wow.
Which I wouldn't wish on anyone. And then totally incompetent at that, so I got to be into the service school and stayed there until 2005. So that's kind of the brief.
Go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, going along with that, you said about going to tech school. I hear that you actually train technicians as part of your tenure there, and you're able to pass on some of that Saab knowledge to some of the younger and upcoming guys in the Saab field.
Oh, that was exactly what we did. That was my, basically my entire career was teaching technicians. And it was all very hands-on. The average class was about 6 people. So you had a good interaction, and you got them onto the cars as much as you could. So that was my life.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the weird things that, things that people might not know. When these cars came off the dock, you said they were coated in something called Cosmoline. And tell me about those conditions. What was that?
Oh, a preservative. And Cosmoline is sort of a generic term, but it was, in Saab's case, it was a thick, white, chalky material that protected the cars from, again, on the ship, they were stacked 5 high on hanging almost like a parking garage, but open grates, so you had oil and fluids leaking through, and you needed to keep the cars fresh during the shipment. So they came through with that. That had to be cleaned off, minor work done, and then they were handed over to the dealers for the final preparation. Okay, yeah, that's about what if everyone's looking at the line of 93s there, ports would be full of things as far as the eye could see.
And you told me that there was some shenanigans there with a longshoreman occasionally with these cars.
Uh, Again, when I joined in '68, we still were selling two-strokes. We had the last of the two-strokes the engines had been made smaller, so they got through emissions, and used to go on the ship and have to, about 1,000 cars, usually a couple hundred two-strokes, you'd have to go on and get these started after they've been sitting in a cold, damp space for a long time. And so you have to get them fired up. Sometimes the clutches would be stuck, so you'd have to warm them up, hold the pedal down, put them in gear, go a couple feet, stomp on the brakes, see if you get the clutch disc broken loose from the flywheel, and then turn them over to the longshoreman. And of course, these were all 4-speed column shift. And all the longshoremen had all they'd ever driven, if it was a manual transmission, was a 3 on the tree. So they'd take and put the shift lever down into what for them was first gear, but in reality was second gear on a SAAB. And they'd start slipping the clutch, and you'd reach in through the window and put it up in first gear, but you couldn't tell the longshoreman anything. So they'd put it down in second, give you a dirty look, and drive over your foot while you went off through the ship. And again, a couple hundred two-strokes fired up on a cold day was a health hazard, to say the least. They used to occasionally make us all get off the ship until the fans clear the smoke out. It's a different world.
Different world.
So another question that came in from Facebook, John, what port did these cars arrive in typically? Because there were a couple, right?
Oh, there were several. I was in New Haven, Connecticut, and that was the headquarters building and the main port. But at different times, we had cars coming into Jacksonville. We had a port operation out in Seattle. We had cars that at different times came into Baltimore, LA, a couple different locations over the years.
So it looks like they came in across the country. We're looking at a picture now, and this looks like it's in front of Manhattan. Is that right?
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah.
It sure does. Yep. So that's an early, you notice the door handle is on the front there. So that was the classic suicide door 93, which puts it, the newest that could be is 1959. So probably earlier than that.
So we were talking earlier about the aircraft sort of inspired engineering and design. And so, here's an old one, I think, with that front door handle. This looks like one of those late 50s. These guys, internally in the company, was the fact that they were tying it into the aircraft thing, was that seen as a positive or kind of a piece of marketing hype?
No, it was a positive. They very quickly became separated, but there was engineering feedback. There was some shared engineering, particularly early on. But there was always a link, and sometimes it was one of my favorite things was if you got into the car that Eric Carlson won the RAC rally in. The seat belts in that car were 3 or 4 inches wide, and they were out of the aircraft division. The entire rally department was run on a shoestring, and when they wanted seat belts, they went over to the aircraft division and picked up belts that had been pulled out because they were out of spec or too old, and they went in the rally cars. So there was always, in one way or the other, a link there between the aircraft and the automotive divisions.
And rally was an important marketing tool, right? Is that what I understand?
It was huge. It was huge. Again, in the U.S., it was rallying. There were hill climbs. Actually, one of the things that got us into the U.S. in the beginning was the distributor that we had out in Colorado, Dick Catron. He used to race a lot. He even ran long before Tom Donnie. He ran the Salt Flats. In my part of the world here in New England, it was always ice racing, and the dealers ice raced. Our own field people ice raced. They'd take the company car and hope it didn't get banged up too badly in the course of the ice race over the weekend. But it was always good publicity because SAAB was dominant in the ice racing field for years and years. So we made a fair bit of, we couldn't afford to buy proper advertising, but you could kind of boast about the rally end of things.
Yeah, I read somewhere that way early, long before this video was shot, in the 50s when they were rallying, they entered a very impressive race somewhere up in the Northeast there, a 3-day race, 1,500 miles, and SAAB's placed first, second, and third, and that really was a huge factor in the initial launch of this car in the United States.
Quite right. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Okay, I see, is that car, referring to the RAC car, is that car in the museum at Sturgis? Yes, it is. One of the neat things I used to do as a sidebar to my job was maintain SAAB's historical fleet. And that was a pretty good collection of cars. Some of the race cars, the early Sonnet 1 Open, but the RAC car was found at an estate sale by Eric Johnson out in Minnesota. He ran it, went to a rally in Norway, came back. We swapped him a brand new SAAB 9.5 station wagon, and I went down to Baltimore and picked up that car, had it in the school for quite a while, and used to take it to SAAB events. And then finally they took it away from me and went down to Georgia, and it ended up in the Heritage Museum in Detroit, and Tom Donnie has it now. So it stayed in the family.
Oh, that's great.
Very good.
So let me jump in here with I want to hear more about these early engines, and why is it that our engines are slanted the way they are?
Oh, a couple of reasons. It helps for packaging, certainly, keeps the hood low. Another reason, of course, the engine that you have up there now with the blue valve cover, that's the 1.7 Triumph or standard engine that we had in 69, 70, 71. 72, they were the 185 generally. But at any rate, again, it keeps the engine lower. The other side of things, as we were talking earlier, not uncommon practice. International Scout did the same thing. You take a V8 engine and saw off one bank of cylinders, and what's left over is a 4. That engine in another life was the infamous Triumph Stag V8, which meant it was twice as bad as our standard engine. But anyhow, that's why that is.
And speaking of engine reliability, there were some comments we discussed earlier about how these 2-cycle engines would sometimes seize up due to poor lubrication from its owners, unfortunate lack of understanding on how to properly lubricate the engines. And due to this being common enough, there was an actual warehouse created in a basement. And can you tell us more about that, or is that something you're familiar with?
I'm sorry, warehouse?
Basically, Millet had created an engine rebuild shop in the basement of a warehouse, and that was one of the cool tidbits I was curious
about. The original, again, 100 Waterfront Street, where the headquarters was. Down in the basement, we had a complete rebuild center, boring bars, honing machines, everything, and the crankshafts came through from Sweden, rebuilt, but we did the overhauling there, and for a while did transmissions as well. Yeah, there was quite a bit of turnover, particularly when we got into the lifetime engine warranty days, where it became hard to sell a 2-stroke, so you had to pretend that it was so phenomenally reliable that you could warranty it for life. And so there was a lot of turnover there where owner came in unhappy and you just throw another engine in and back they'd come to New Haven there, which worked out well for me because I just used to go down to that warranty pile and pick out the best looking one and it'd go in my car. And frequently there's nothing wrong with them. You just had to leave a much worse one on the line and everything was good.
Everything and you got away with it. Now, you said earlier that the 99 launch was one of your worst periods with Saab. Why is that? I thought the 99 was a huge success.
Saab had a proud history of not getting cars right for about the first 3 years. Unfortunately, but again, a very small company, kind of shoestring. The 99 was actually a good car, but again, the early transmission up until, 72 was the first really good transmission we had in one of those cars. The engine, again, Triumph engine, very, problematical. Head gasket failures because on the 69s, one of the passages in the cylinder head was offset about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch from lining up with the passage in the block. And you blow the head gasket and then you find it was impossible to get the cylinder head off because the studs that were sitting through the head at an angle would would chemically seize into the end of the head. It was a service nightmare.
It sounds like it.
Things got much better. And the Swedes had been known from the get-go because the 2-liter engine came out in Sweden, the one built in Södertälje over at the Scania factory. That came out in 72 in Europe and 73 over here, and that was just night and day. Went from being a hand grenade with a blue valve cover to something that just lived forever.
Hand grenade with a blue valve cover. I love that. That's great.
It's funny you make that analogy.
Not to say they weren't fun to drive, but you just didn't drive them very long usually.
So the turbo is something that, of course, Saab is famous for, and the APC system is kind of interesting. For those who aren't all that mechanical, give us a quick overview on APC and what made it special, and then I want to lead you into a story that you told me earlier.
Okay. Early 900s. The issue, what APC did was, if you took, for instance, the 78 99 turbo, as great as a car as it was, you had to manually set the boost pressure for basically a compromise. You had to set it for the worst possible gas on the hottest day, and you had to make sure that under those conditions and maybe the timing not quite set right, get it wrong and you start melting holes in pistons. So you couldn't optimize the engine because of the limitations of variables. Anyway, what APC did was bolted on a knock detector, took, normally you just had a short hose going from the output of the turbo to the diaphragm on the wastegate, and the wastegate read 100% of what the turbo was developing. What Per Gilbrand did, Swedish engineer who was responsible for a lot of our engine work, what he did was to put a knock detector on the side of the engine, so you're tuning it and listening for the mechanical noise that accompanies detonation and knock. And we had a solenoid valve that, in effect, had the ability to lie to the wastegate. You would allow boost pressure to build to the point where you heard knock, and then you would allow a little more pressure to go to the wastegate, and you'd open the wastegate and bleed off some of the boost pressure. Until you heard that knock, you just, in effect, dumped the output from the turbo, didn't let it get to the wastegate, and boost pressure to go up until you heard the knock. So again, if you want to go to that SAE car talking about the other night there, the modification to run on 2 different levels of fuel,
Exactly.
Is
That's
that
where
where
I was
you're
going with this. So you got a request from an engineer to put two different fuel supplies in one car so they could illustrate the difference between premium fuel and low grade fuel, right?
right? Again, this was Perigil brand, lovely gentleman, um, a true motor aficionado. He had a complete collection of engines at home, including a Merlin out of a Chieftain tank that he talked the Swedish army out of. So he
Wow.
would roll that thing out and fire it off in his driveway to the delight of the neighbors. He also built tiny engines, and there's a recording of him at a concert hall in Sweden playing tunes with this bank of tiny engines that he built. He was a
That's
phenomenal,
awesome.
phenomenal person. Any rate, he had to put on a presentation to Society of Automotive Engineers out in Detroit, and he wanted to be able to show them exactly what APC did. So the best way of doing that was to, again, have a car that you could at one moment run on lousy gasoline and in the next moment switch over and run on good gasoline. So I always got involved in special project type things. So it was, yes, put in a second tank, put in the solenoids and relays and whatnot. You need to push a button on the dash and switch from tank to tank. So he picked up the car in Connecticut, drove it out using the fact that he had twice the gasoline, twice the range, drove it out to Detroit, took engineers out and would here's what it's like on 87 octane, here's what it's like on 93, and a night and day difference. So that was that project.
That's
And
pretty interesting.
very clearly, you could pretty well tell if the gas station was honest or not in the early days there by just looking at the boost gauge. Because what came out of the pump wasn't always what it said on the face there.
So was that kind of just the atmosphere in the company, though? Could you just come up with an idea and run with it? How I can't imagine that would happen today.
Nope, but it happened then, and it would happen in a company the size of SAAB. Again, we were a few hundred people. And again, if something needed doing, you just went and did it. If you weren't, as the case was at one point, happy with the wiring diagrams we got from Sweden, because they were drawn to take up an entire wall and then shrunk down to fit in the page in an owner's manual, and they were just indecipherable.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
So took some of my school budget, had wiring diagrams made up in the U.S., and then they served as a model. The Swedes picked up on the idea. So, this isn't bad, and went and made their diagrams accordingly. Some of my instructors and I came up with diagnostic procedures for the rather complicated emissions relay panel that we had on the later CIS cars. Swedes didn't have an emissions control, so they weren't real concerned about it. So we made an entire book of workable service procedures, diagnostic procedures. I took it over to Sweden. They said, okay, well, we're running a class now. Why don't you teach, England and Germany and whatnot? So, there was none of this not invented here syndrome. Was allowed to say, okay, well, here, that's a pretty good idea, and it would show up, show up in the next year's service manuals, which was always as a great boost to your ego, and it was just an indication of a very flexible organization.
Oh, that's awesome.
So where did things go wrong? You left in 2005. GM was already well in control. Could you feel the shift within the company at that time?
It had been a long time coming, and quite honestly, again, at times you wondered how we survived as well as we did, as long as we did, because we were always on a bit of a shoestring. And it had gotten to the point where, 1950, you could build a car in your backyard and with some very talented engineering and not that much money, make it work. Mm-hmm. When you get to, where the bar has risen to today, you just needed billions of dollars, and we didn't have it. So we were dependent on GM. And then you inevitably, you get into the whole economy of scale. Well, use our platform, use our this, use our that. And you can understand how it happened, but you kind of lost a lot of the Swedishness, a lot of the charm went away. But having said that, without GM, we probably would have gone away 15 years earlier than we did. So.
Hey, great question just came through there. I want to put it in front of you. What is the best model year of the 900 to own and why?
Okay. Again, personal preference. There are folks that love the flat nose earlier years. I happen to prefer the later, 88, 89, 90 through that range. Better look. The handbrake is on the back where you can use it to actually do handbrake turns, whereas opposed to the earlier ones where rumor was that we had the handbrake on the front for as long as we did because the Swedish authorities didn't like people doing handbrake turns. But anyway, I like the later 900s. Long as it's the 2-liter and not the 2.1 engine, but that's getting into trivia. So
yeah, I know what you mean there. Okay, I think we've answered everybody's questions here. Is there anything you want to leave us with, John?
I'm sorry. Yes.
Is there anything you want to leave us with?
Just again, as I started our conversation, I could not have asked for a better career. I would have worked for free if I could have done it. It was one of these, just not any particular talent on my part, just dumb luck. I got where I was. It was an ideal organization. Again, through the entire span, even up darn near to the end there, it was always that small group, very talented people. It was a great place to work.
Yeah,
Loved it dearly.
I didn't ask this question earlier. What Saabs do you own today?
I'm sorry?
What Saabs do you own today?
Oh, there's lots of them. You have to ask what ones are on the road. My current daily driver is a 93.95 with 301,000 miles on it, and as near as I can tell, still has the original clutch in it. I know it's got the original timing chain. So
wow.
There is that. I've got no end of projects. I have a 63 96 that I need to get back together again. I need a 2-stroke. And there is a gorgeous 96, 99 up on the lift, so it's in dry storage out in the barn. That's always had a soft spot for 9,000s. So I'm sorry, I hope I said 9,000, 96, 9,000. So there's, and then you get into the 95 V4 that if I live to be 110, I'll put together someday, but just you have to know where to stop counting. I have a daughter who is insisting I build her a real 900, so there's a 91 4-door sitting out in the front yard that I have to get to someday. So there are a number of Saabs there.
Sounds like no end of projects. That's great. Well, I really appreciate you sharing some of the early days with us here, John. And, who knows? We might circle back with you and touch base on a couple of mechanical issues down the road if some people need some help. How's that?
Well, certainly you want to learn about T7 or V4 transmissions, or I can bore you to tears. So by all means.
Awesome.
All right, buddy. Good. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
A lot of history with that guy, isn't there? That's pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious, a career spanning that long and just being involved in Saab for that length of time and seeing new models come out all the time, man, it must have been fantastic, man.
And wouldn't it be nice? I mean, imagine how many people could say, I loved every minute of it and I'd go back there to work today for free if I had the opportunity. That's great to hear. Well, all right. Hey, I've got some traveling to do next week. You're not going to be around, but we will be back the 13th and the 21st. Mm-hmm. And so we hope we'll see you back here then. Mark, have a great New Year, buddy.
Also, everyone here who's watching the show, have a great New Year yourselves, and keep those SAABs going well into 2022.
All right, guys, we'll see you later.